Don't embarrass me. My husband's voice was barely above a whisper, but somehow it cut through the polished conversations beneath the chandeliers of the White House East Wing. We had just cleared the first security checkpoint. Uniformed Marines stood at attention. Military aides moved with quiet precision. Guests in evening gowns and decorated dress uniforms filled the marble hallway. Ethan adjusted the medals on his Army service uniform and glanced at me without smiling. "Just stay close," he muttered. "Smile when you're supposed to. Tonight is important." I looked at him and said nothing. He mistook my silence for obedience. At the check-in desk, a young hostess smiled. "Good evening. May I see your invitations, please?" Ethan produced his envelope with confidence. "There you go." She scanned his QR code. A clean beep. "Welcome, Colonel Harper." He nodded, then looked at me with that familiar little smirk. "Well?" I reached into my handbag, but instead of pulling out the invitation he had watched arrive in our mailbox, I removed another envelope, one he had never seen. The White House seal shimmered under the crystal lights. His eyebrows narrowed. "What is that?" I didn't answer. I handed it to the hostess. She scanned it. The scanner beeped, then stopped. Her smile faded. She stared at the screen, checked it again, then a third time. Without another word, she looked past me toward a 4-star Admiral standing several feet away. "Sir," she said, her voice suddenly careful. "She's here." The Admiral turned immediately. The moment he saw me, his expression changed. He walked toward us with purpose, and every nearby conversation seemed to fade. Ethan looked from me to the Admiral, completely confused. The Admiral stopped in front of me and extended his hand. "Colonel Rachel Harper," he said warmly. "We've been looking forward to seeing you." People stopped talking. My husband blinked. "What?" I met the Admiral's eyes. "It's an honor to finally meet in person, Admiral." "The honor is ours," he said. "The President will be pleased you've arrived." Beside me, Ethan's face went pale. I could almost hear the questions racing through his mind. The President? Looking forward to seeing her? Why? But before he could ask, everything changed. Because this story didn't begin at the White House. It began almost a year earlier, back when I still believed humility could save a marriage. Back when I thought love was stronger than pride. My name is Rachel Harper. I'm 29 years old. For nearly a decade, I served as an Army logistics officer. If you've never worked in military logistics, it is easy to underestimate what we do. Most people picture paperwork, spreadsheets, supply rooms, clipboards. Even Ethan used to joke that I was the queen of inventory. I smiled every time. Not because it was funny, because correcting him would have required explaining projects I was not allowed to discuss. Operational security was not optional. It was my oath. While combat commanders became the visible face of successful missions, people like me worked quietly behind the scenes. Fuel, medical supplies, aircraft routing, emergency transportation, strategic contingency planning. When everything worked, nobody noticed. When something failed, everyone did. I preferred it that way. Recognition had never motivated me. My father served 32 years in the Army, and he taught me something I never forgot. The best officers don't chase applause, he used to say. They chase responsibility. I tried to live by that, even after I married Ethan. When we first met at Fort Liberty, he was not like the man standing beside me at the White House. He laughed easily. He thanked enlisted soldiers by name. He stayed late to help junior officers. He admired people because of their character, not their rank. That was the man I fell in love with. But promotions can change people. Not always, but sometimes. Each new assignment made Ethan a little more concerned with appearances. Every medal became another conversation starter. Every promotion made him slightly less interested in anyone else's accomplishments, especially mine. At neighborhood barbecues, someone would ask what I did. Before I could answer, Ethan would grin. "Rachel keeps everything organized." People laughed. "So she's the organized one." I smiled politely. Something like that. At family dinners, my mother-in-law introduced him like a ceremony. "My son is one of the Army's brightest officers." Then she would gesture toward me. "And Rachel works somewhere with logistics." As if my career were an afterthought. No one meant real harm. At least that was what I kept telling myself. Over time, Ethan stopped asking about my work altogether. He assumed every late night meant paperwork. Every classified call meant scheduling. Every sudden trip meant another conference. He never imagined that some of those weeks determined whether thousands of American service members would receive critical support overseas. I couldn't tell him, not because I didn't trust him, because I had signed documents promising I wouldn't. So I carried two burdens, the responsibility of the mission, and the loneliness of succeeding where even my husband couldn't know who I truly was. Looking back, I can pinpoint the moment our marriage started drifting. It wasn't because Ethan stopped loving me. It was because he slowly fell in love with something else. Status. When he pinned on Lieutenant Colonel, I was happier than anyone. We had moved from base to base, missed birthdays, postponed vacations, and celebrated anniversaries over video calls. His promotion felt like our victory. At least I thought it did. Then he started introducing himself by rank before name. Every conversation circled back to his command, and whenever someone asked about me, he waved it away. Rachel keeps busy with logistics. Not army logistics. Not strategic logistics. Just logistics. One evening, at a retirement dinner outside Arlington, a retired Marine colonel asked where I served. Before I could answer, Ethan laughed. Nothing exciting. She makes sure people get supplies. The colonel smiled politely. I spent 30 years in logistics support. Then he looked at me. That usually means you know where every skeleton is buried. I smiled. We try to prevent skeletons. He laughed. Ethan didn't. On the drive home, he stared through the windshield. You didn't have to impress him. I wasn't trying to. It sounded like you were correcting me. I answered his question. You know what I mean. No, I didn't. But I stopped arguing. That became my habit. Every disagreement somehow ended with Ethan accusing me of being defensive, sensitive, or competitive. Silence required less energy. Unfortunately, silence can also become permission. Months later, my responsibilities expanded. I was selected for a joint planning initiative involving the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, and several civilian agencies. The work required additional clearances, background investigations, and long hours inside secure facilities where personal phones were not allowed. What are you working on? Ethan asked one evening. I can't talk about it. He rolled his eyes. So, paperwork? I simply nodded. It hurt less than explaining why I couldn't explain. At dinner with his family, he joked, the Army finally trusts her with bigger spreadsheets. The table chuckled. His mother smiled proudly at him. I'm just glad one of you has a career people understand. I looked down at my plate. My father's voice came back to me. Never measure your worth by the loudest person in the room. After dinner, my father-in-law followed me onto the porch and handed me coffee. You never defend yourself, he said softly. I don't see the point. My wife doesn't understand military careers, he said. But Ethan does. That sentence stayed with me, because he was right. Ethan understood exactly how important logistics could be. He simply didn't believe my work was important. Then Washington called. I reported to the Pentagon the following Monday. Inside a secure conference room, maps covered the walls. Digital displays tracked overseas operations. Senior officers discussed supply routes, humanitarian aid, evacuation scenarios, medical corridors, fuel depots, and emergency staging areas. For months, my life became classified briefings and 18-hour days. Sometimes I left before sunrise. Sometimes I came home after midnight. Ethan barely noticed. At another military social event, someone congratulated him on his evaluation, then turned to me. And how's work going, Colonel Harper? Before I could answer, Ethan laughed. Oh, don't encourage her. If you ask Rachel, she'll convince you logistics runs the entire Army. Everyone chuckled politely. I forced a smile. Inside, something cracked. Not because he embarrassed me, because he genuinely believed what he was saying. He had forgotten one of the oldest truths in military service. Victory belongs to everyone, not just the people standing in front. That autumn, 2 envelopes arrived. Heavy cream paper, embossed seals, official lettering. Ethan opened his first. The White House, he shouted. We've been invited. He held the invitation like a winning lottery ticket and immediately called his mother, his brother, and 2 friends from command. Everyone heard the same sentence. I've been invited to the White House. Not once did he notice the second envelope beneath his. Mine. Different seal. Different instructions. Different arrival time. Different protocol. I read every line, folded it carefully, and slipped it into my desk drawer. That night, Ethan planned his medals, photographs, and conversations. Then he smiled across the dinner table. This is probably the biggest night of my career. I looked at him for a few seconds, then lowered my eyes. No, I whispered to myself. It isn't. He never heard me. That was the last ordinary evening we ever spent together. At the White House, the marble floors reflected the chandeliers. Portraits of presidents lined the walls. The Marine band played softly somewhere beyond the hallway. Everything spoke of honor, service, sacrifice. But standing beside me, Ethan looked at the room as though it belonged to him. Remember, he whispered, there are generals here. I know. And cabinet officials. I know. This isn't the place to make small talk with everyone you meet. I understand. He smiled, satisfied that I had accepted another lesson. If only he had known. After the hostess scanned my invitation and called the Admiral over, everything moved quickly. The Admiral shook my hand. Colonel Harper. I'm Admiral James Whitmore. We've spoken several times by secure video conference. Yes, sir. It's good to finally meet in person. He stepped aside, almost respectfully. As requested, everything is ready. Thank you, sir. The President asked to be notified the moment you arrived. I heard Ethan inhale sharply. What? The Admiral finally looked at him. You must be Colonel Ethan Harper. Yes, sir. It's nice to meet you. The greeting lasted less than 2 seconds. Then his attention returned to me. If you'll come with me. A protocol officer appeared beside Ethan. I'm sorry, sir. Your seating assignment is this way. Ethan frowned. My wife is with me. I'm aware, the officer said politely. Colonel Harper has separate seating arrangements. Silence. Complete silence. I looked at Ethan for the first time since entering. He searched my face for an explanation. I offered none. There had been too many years of unanswered questions between us. This was not the moment to answer them. I followed the Admiral into the East Room. Rows of chairs stretched across the floor. Cabinet members, Joint Chiefs, members of Congress, families of fallen service members, recipients of military honors, humanitarian representatives. This was not a simple reception. It was one of the most important recognition ceremonies of the year. The Admiral escorted me to the second row, reserved for special guests. Several senior officers stood when I approached. A Navy Vice Admiral smiled. It's good to finally put a face to the name. An Air Force general shook my hand. My staff speaks highly of you. The director of the Defense Logistics Agency laughed. I was beginning to think you weren't real. I smiled politely. Most of them knew me only through secure screens. Across the room, Ethan stood 8 rows back, staring. His commanding general leaned toward him. Ethan, do you know Colonel Harper personally? Ethan answered automatically. She's my wife. The general raised an eyebrow. You never mentioned that. For perhaps the first time in our marriage, Ethan had no words. The President entered with the Secretary of Defense. The anthem played. Then he approached the podium. Tonight, he said, we recognize Americans whose names rarely appear in newspapers. The men and women whose planning, discipline, and quiet professionalism protect service members and civilians around the world. I kept my eyes on the podium. Many of tonight's honorees worked under strict classification. Some could not tell their own families what they were doing. They accepted that burden willingly. Then a satellite image appeared on the screen. Supply routes, medical evacuation corridors, temporary humanitarian shelters. The President continued. Last year, one coordinated logistics operation prevented what experts believed could have become one of the largest humanitarian disasters involving American personnel in recent history. Murmurs moved through the room. Most had never heard about it. Until that night, it had remained classified. Planning that mission required extraordinary leadership across multiple agencies, the President said, and one officer consistently refused individual recognition. My stomach tightened. I knew what was coming, but hearing it aloud felt different. The President looked toward my section. Colonel Rachel Harper, would you please join me on stage? Across the room, Ethan slowly turned toward me. His face had gone completely colorless. At that moment, my husband finally understood. The White House invitation had never been his story. It had always been mine. I stood as the room rose with applause. As I walked toward the stage, the Admiral whispered, "You've earned this, Colonel." I didn't do it alone. I know, he said. That's exactly why you're standing up there. The president shook my hand. Colonel Harper, the nation owes you its gratitude. It owes my team, sir. He smiled. That's exactly what everyone told me you'd say. Soft laughter moved through the room. The president turned back to the audience. Last spring, intelligence suggested an Allied evacuation mission overseas could collapse within 72 hours. Analysts estimated thousands of American service members, diplomatic personnel, and civilians could become stranded. The room went silent. The solution required unprecedented cooperation between every military branch and multiple civilian agencies. Colonel Rachel Harper coordinated that effort. Applause struck the room again. Because of that leadership, he said, not a single American life was lost during the evacuation. This time, the applause lasted long enough to make me uncomfortable. Every compliment belonged to hundreds of people: pilots, mechanics, nurses, planners, radio operators, supply officers, young enlisted soldiers loading aircraft in the dark. I accepted the framed Presidential Distinguished Civil Military Service Medal with both hands, then stepped to the microphone. The room quieted. I wasn't expecting to speak, I said. A few people smiled. But there is something I'd like to say. I looked across the audience. My father served in the Army for 32 years. He taught me that leadership is not measured by how many people salute you. It is measured by how many people succeed because you quietly did your job. Several veterans nodded. I accept this recognition on behalf of the military professionals whose names will never appear in headlines. The mechanics, planners, logisticians, radio operators, medics, and families waiting at home. They are the reason missions succeed. They are the reason people come home. The applause returned, longer this time. When I stepped away, the president leaned toward me. You just made my speech better. I laughed quietly. I doubt that, sir. I don't. The ceremony continued for another hour. Afterward, guests moved into the reception rooms. The Admiral found me first. You've become very popular. I'd rather disappear. He laughed. I believe that. Cabinet officials, senators, and retired officers stopped to congratulate me. A Navy captain told me his grandson wanted to become a logistics officer after hearing my remarks. That meant more to me than the medal. Then I saw Ethan. He stood alone near a tall window overlooking the south lawn. The confidence he had worn all evening was gone. When our eyes met, he walked toward me slowly. Rachel, I waited. I didn't know. I know. No. His voice cracked. I really didn't know. I know. He looked down. I thought logistics meant paperwork. You thought my logistics meant paperwork. He closed his eyes. I was wrong. You were. I embarrassed myself tonight. I shook my head gently. No, Ethan. You embarrassed yourself long before tonight. His shoulders dropped. I never saw you. That sentence hurt more than everything else. Because it was true. Not cruel. Just true. I saw your rank, he whispered. I saw your job title. I never stopped to see you. Before I could answer, his commanding general approached. Ethan. Sir. The general looked from him to me, then sighed. I've known Colonel Harper's work for almost a year. The operation she led saved careers. He corrected himself. No, it saved lives. Ethan stared. You knew. Yes, the general said. And somehow you never realized the remarkable officer you came home to every evening. He was not angry. He sounded disappointed. That was worse. After he walked away, Ethan stood in silence. Finally he asked the question I knew had been burning in him since the check-in desk. Why didn't you tell me? Because I legally couldn't. I understand that. I turned toward him. But even if I could have, I'm not sure you would have listened. His eyes filled with regret. For the first time since I had known him, there was no rank, no medals, no performance. Only a man forced to confront the difference between admiration and respect. And he was finally beginning to understand that one could never replace the other. People think revenge is loud. They imagine shouting, slammed doors, public humiliation, making someone hurt as much as they hurt you. A year earlier, I might have believed that too. But standing in the White House with a medal I never asked for, I realized something unexpected. The greatest revenge was not making Ethan feel small. It was finally seeing myself clearly. For years I measured my marriage by how much patience I could show. I believed endurance was the same thing as love. If I worked harder, stayed quieter, became more understanding, maybe Ethan would finally see me. The truth was simpler. People do not suddenly learn to value what they have spent years overlooking, sometimes they have to lose it first. As the reception ended, guests moved toward the exits. Outside, Washington lights reflected against wet pavement after a brief spring rain. I stood near the entrance, breathing in the cool night air. Behind me, footsteps approached. I was hoping you hadn't left yet. Ethan's voice sounded different. Not confident, not commanding, just tired. I've been thinking. I imagine you have. I owe you more than an apology. I looked at him. I owe you years of respect I never gave you. Neither of us spoke. When we met at Fort Liberty, he said, I admired everything about you. You were smarter than me, calmer than me. I knew that. So what changed? He looked down at the sidewalk. I started chasing promotions. Somewhere along the way, I started believing my rank made me more important. He laughed bitterly. I spent years teaching young officers servant leadership. I wasn't practicing it at home. That honesty mattered. Excuses can be rehearsed. Honesty usually cannot. I don't expect forgiveness tonight, he said. You shouldn't. I just wanted you to know. He swallowed hard. I'm ashamed of the husband I've been. I nodded once. Then I walked away. Not because I hated him, because healing does not happen in one conversation. Real change takes time. Over the following months, our lives moved in different directions. I accepted an assignment at the Army Logistics University in Virginia, mentoring young officers preparing for leadership. It turned out I enjoyed teaching even more than planning operations. On the first day of every class, I wrote the same sentence across the whiteboard. Leadership begins with respect. Then I asked what it meant. The answers were always different. Months later, Ethan requested a transfer out of command. No one forced him. He wanted to rebuild the kind of leader he had once been. He also enrolled in Army leadership counseling. A mutual friend told me something that stayed with me. He never talks about the White House ceremony. What does he talk about? The day he realized he stopped listening to the person who knew him best. That sounded more important than any punishment I could have imagined. 8 months after the ceremony, I received a text. Would you meet me? No expectations. Just coffee. I stared at it for a long time. Then I replied. 1 hour. We met at a small cafe overlooking the Potomac River. No uniforms, no medals, no cameras. Just 2 people who had once promised to spend their lives together. He looked healthier, calmer, older somehow. Not in years. In wisdom. He did not begin with an apology. He had already done that. Instead, he asked about my students. I asked about his new unit. We laughed about our first apartment near Fort Liberty, where the air conditioner barely worked, and the kitchen table doubled as a desk. For the first time in years, the conversation felt equal. As we finished coffee, he reached into his jacket pocket. I found this while cleaning my desk. He handed me a small photograph. It was from the week we graduated officer candidate school. We stood side by side. No medals, no impressive assignments, just 2 young officers smiling at the future. I miss those 2 people, he said quietly. So do I. I don't know if we can ever become them again. I smiled gently. We shouldn't. He looked surprised. We're supposed to become better. That was the last thing I said before we walked outside. Whether our marriage survived is not the most important part of this story. Some endings do not fit neatly into one chapter. What matters is this. Ethan became a humbler officer. I became a stronger woman. And neither of us ever confused rank with worth again. Never underestimate the quiet person in the room. The people who seek the least attention are often carrying the greatest responsibility. Titles fade. Uniforms are eventually folded away. Medals gather dust. But character is what people remember. And sometimes, the person standing silently beside you is not small. They are simply disciplined enough not to announce their own importance.